Britain's secret medical emergency plan, what the NHS is not telling you. Now, the NHS has a plan for when it can no longer cope. It is a public document. But what if I told you that buried within its official frameworks is a hard truth about what really happens when the systems get overwhelmed? This is not a secret conspiracy. It is written down in black and white for anyone to read, that are rarely, if ever, explained to the public. This is the detail they're not telling you, and it reveals the sharp, cold edge of a system designed not just to save lives, but to manage its own limitations in a crisis. Now, I'm not talking about a hidden apocalypse plan. I'm talking about something much more real. The documented, planned way that NHS services are designed to scale back under severe pressure. The public assumes that 999 and A&E are an absolute guarantee, a constant backstop in any crisis. But official planning documents show that in a prolonged multi-system emergency, that assumption is dangerously flawed. Today, I'm going to show you what these plans say, what they mean for you, and why the real story isn't about panic, it's about being prepared. Now, it all starts with a formal architecture called the Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response Framework, or the EPRR. This is not just a dusty policy document, it's how the NHS meets its statutory duties under the Civil Contingencies Act of 2004. Now, this act requires core bodies, including the NHS Trust and other NHS organisations, to plan for a wide range of major incidents: extreme weather, infectious disease outbreaks, major transport accidents and even terror attacks. Now, to break this down into plain English, this means that the NHS is legally required to plan for scenarios when it becomes overwhelmed. Now, these plans aren't about magically created infinite capacity. They are damage limitation systems. They are playbooks for how to function when normal operations have failed. The core principle is not to guarantee full service, but to maintain the most critical functions while restoring normality as quickly as possible. Now, these are not just hypothetical exercises. The government's own National Risk Register, the public version of its classified security assessment, identifies a future pandemic as a risk with a 5 to 25% chance of occurring in the next 5 years. Now, the register also details plausible high-impact risks like failures in the national electricity grid and other major system shocks. So the NHS doesn't just plan for a bad winter, it games out scenarios of major civil contingencies and plans its response. The key reality of that response is this: the system is designed to deliberately scale back services, redeploy staff and triage not just patients but entire categories of care. It is a strategy for controlled, planned reduction in services, and the goal is to prevent a chaotic total collapse of implementing a series of planned partial service shutdowns. This is the part that's rarely explained. The NHS doesn't promise to keep functioning normally in every crisis. It has a detailed plan for when it can't. What does a planned reduction of services actually look like on the ground? It starts with the declaration of a major incident, a formal step taken when normal emergency services are overwhelmed. Now, when this happens, the hospital doesn't just get busier, it fundamentally changes how it operates. The goal shifts from providing standard care to every single person who needs it to a new, brutal calculus, doing the most good for the most people with severely limited resources. Now, the most visceral example of this is triage. So, for example, in a mass casualty event, first responders and hospital staff will use specific protocols like the NHS Major Incident Triage tool, and this will help them rapidly sort patients. And you may have seen simplified versions of this in films. So you get green for the walking wounded, yellow or P2 for those who are injured but stable, red for P1 for those who are critically injured but savable, and black for those who are either deceased already or have injuries so catastrophic that they are deemed expectant. Now, this expectant category is the starkest reality of a major incident plan. It means that in a true worst case scenario, if your injuries are considered too severe to survive with the resources available, and that's the resources available at that time, not necessarily what would have been available outside of a major catastrophe, you may be made comfortable, but you're not going to receive active life-saving treatment, and those resources will be directed to someone with a greater chance of survival. Now, it is a horrifying thought, but it is the logical endpoint of a system designed to maximise overall survival, not individual survival. And while the exact labels and protocols can vary, the principle of prioritising limited resources is a universal feature of mass casualty planning. You don't need a terror attack for these principles to kick in though. Elements of this planned response are visible every single winter. We see it in the language used in official reports: winter pressures, surge capacity and escalation levels. These are all terms for a system operating at or beyond its limits. Now, for years, reports have shown that the NHS bed occupancy regularly pushes above 90%, a level associated with increased risk to patients during winter peaks. National averages can hover in the low 90s, with many individual trusts going above 95%. So think about that. A hospital with no spare beds has slower admissions, longer A&E waits, delayed discharges and queues of ambulances waiting outside. Now, during the 24-25 winter, there were 471 instances of A&E departments declaring a divert, where they were so full they had to ask ambulances to take patients elsewhere. So what happens when the system is this strained? The principles of a major incident response kick in, just on a more slower, more chronic scale. Non-urgent elective care like knee replacement or hip replacement is often the first to be postponed to free up beds and staff. During the extreme prolonged pressures of the COVID-19 pandemic, even some urgent cancer treatments were delayed based on clinical judgment of risk, though this is not typical for most short-term major incidents. Now, the idea that you can't rely on 999 during a crisis is an oversimplification, but it points to a real phenomenon. In a sustained multi-day crisis, 999 will remain operational, but the service you receive will change. Response times will lengthen, the questions asked by the call handler will become stricter, designed to filter out anything that isn't in immediate threat to life. Ambulances will be reserved for the most critical cases, and you may be told to make your own way to the hospital, to contact your GP, NHS 111 instead, or even the pharmacy. The system doesn't shut down, the gateway just narrows, hour by hour. But guys, remember, you shouldn't be calling an ambulance unless it's life or death anyway, and way too many people waste an ambulance for absolutely no reason because they're lazy or they just don't want to get themselves on the damn bus. Now, the solution is preparedness, not panic. Hearing all this can feel overwhelming, even terrifying. It can feel like the system you've been told you rely on has a secret caveat in the fine print, but the purpose of this isn't to make you panic, it is completely the opposite. The lessons from the NHS's own emergency plan isn't that we're all doomed, it's that we must be prepared. The public is the missing piece in the National Resilience Plan. And the truth is, the NHS has been operating under immense strain for years now, with chronic staff shortages and backlogs just becoming normal. The emergency plans are the blueprint for how that strain will be handled when it tips over into an acute crisis. The gap is between the public's perception of the NHS as an infinite resource and the reality that it's a finite system designed to ration care by necessity when it's pushed to its limits. So what should you do? First, understand the system. Know the difference between 999, 111, your GP and your local pharmacy. In a crisis, using the right service is critical. Calling 999 for something that isn't a life-threatening emergency doesn't just waste your time, it takes resources away from someone who might die without it. Teach this to your friends and your family. Secondly, build household resilience. You don't need an underground bunker, but a well-stocked first aid kit is essential. It should go beyond plasters and include items for managing common illnesses: a thermometer, paracetamol, ibuprofen, oral rehydration salts, even anti-diarrhea tablets, antiseptic wipes and bandages. During a surge in a seasonal virus or a major incident, being able to safely manage at least a fever or a minor injury at home is not just for your own convenience, it's your civic duty. Now, it frees up a hospital bed or a GP appointment for someone who genuinely needs it. Have a plan for any prescription medications you rely on as well. Thirdly, get trained. A basic first aid course is one of the most powerful things you can do for your family and your community. Learning how to perform CPR, use a defibrillator and control bleeding can turn a bystander into a first responder. In a scenario with delayed ambulance response times, those skills are the difference between life and death. And finally, we need to demand more transparency and honesty from our leaders. The NHS and the government produce these detailed plans and risk registers. They model winter pressures and pandemic scenarios. They know the risks. It's time the public was treated like adults and brought into the conversation. Write to your MPs, ask them what they're doing to address the chronic staff shortages and bed capacity issues that make the NHS so vulnerable to surges. Ask them how local resilience forms are preparing your community for the risks outlined in the government's own National Risk Register, and share this video. The more people who understand the reality of how the system is designed to work under pressure, the more prepared we will be as a country. The secret isn't that the NHS has a plan for when it can't cope. The secret is that the plan has always been there waiting for us to read it. The real lesson is not to fear the plan, but to understand it and to prepare it for a world where we might one day need it. Let me know in the comments down below, guys, what have you planned for if the NHS can't cope or a major disaster? How are you going to look after your family? Thanks for watching, guys, and enjoy the next video on your screen right here, right now.